The clock on the hospital wall was a merciless tyrant, each tick of its second hand a tiny hammer against the anvil of my heart. It was 3:14 a.m. The air in the room was thick and sterile, a soupy mixture of antiseptic, wilting flowers, and the faint metallic scent of impending death. My husband, Mark, lay in the bed, a landscape of pale skin and sharp angles under the thin white sheet. His breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my life for the past 3 weeks. I held his hand, my thumb tracing the familiar map of veins on his wrist, trying to pour my own strength into him through my touch. It wasn't working. He was slipping away, and the tide was too strong for me to fight. His sister, Sarah, sat on the other side of the bed, her face a perfect mask of sorrow. She held his other hand, her posture impossibly straight, her expression composed. She had been a rock, everyone said so, my rock. The perfect, supportive sister-in-law, here at all hours, brewing tea, talking to doctors, handling the things my grief-fogged mind couldn't process. I was so grateful for her, I was a fool. The final moments were quiet, almost peaceful. The frantic beeping of the machines had softened to a steady, mournful rhythm. Mark's eyes, which had been closed for hours, fluttered open. They were cloudy, unfocused, searching for something in the dim light of the room. He tried to turn his head toward me, a monumental effort that ended in a weak tremor. His lips parted, and a dry, rasping sound emerged. I leaned closer, my ear just inches from his mouth, desperate to catch his last words, a final "I love you," a last piece of him I could carry with me forever. The whisper came, so faint I almost missed it. Sarah. My blood ran cold. Of all the words he could have said, of all the names he could have spoken, he chose hers. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. He took another rattling breath, a final surge of energy. His eyes found his sister's across the bed. I love. The words hung in the sterile air, a devastating 3-word betrayal that shattered the last remnants of my world. The monitor beside the bed flatlined, its single, piercing tone cutting through the silence. He was gone, and then the impossible happened. She answered back. Sarah, without missing a beat, leaned forward and kissed Mark's cooling forehead. Her voice was a soft, conspiratorial whisper, meant only for him, but I heard every single syllable. "I know, Mark," she murmured, her tone dripping with a tenderness that felt like a knife in my gut. "I love you too. Rest now." She squeezed his hand, then gently placed it on his chest. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with what I thought were tears of shared grief. "He's at peace, Laura," she said, her voice steady. But I wasn't looking at her tears. I was looking at the flicker of something else in her eyes, something I couldn't name. It wasn't sorrow, it was triumph. The sound of the flatline tone seemed to fade, replaced by a roaring in my ears. The room tilted. My husband's last words were for another woman, his own sister, and she had answered him, confirming a secret life I never knew existed, right over his dead body. In that moment, the grief was a distant storm. The immediate reality was a sharp, piercing agony of betrayal, so profound it stole the air from my lungs. I saw our entire 15-year marriage flash before my eyes. Every shared laugh, every quiet moment, every promise, and it was all tainted, rendered a lie by 3 whispered words and a single chilling response. I felt a hand on my shoulder, Sarah's hand. "Let's go, Laura," she said gently. "There's nothing more we can do here." Her touch felt like a brand. I wanted to scream, to shove her away, to demand an explanation. But I was frozen, a statue of shock and horror. I allowed her to lead me out of the room, my legs moving on their own accord, my mind trapped in that horrific, final moment. The clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m. My life as I knew it had ended, not with a bang, but with a whisper. And as the hospital doors slid shut behind us, I had the sickening premonition that this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of a nightmare. The next few days were a blur of condolences and casseroles, a suffocating wave of well-meaning pity that I couldn't escape. Sarah was magnificent. She was the director of my grief, orchestrating the funeral arrangements, fielding phone calls, and deflecting visitors with a gentle but firm hand. "Laura needs her rest," she would say into the phone, her voice a symphony of compassion. "She's utterly devastated." I was, but my devastation was a complex layered thing, a poisonous cocktail of sorrow and suspicion. The image of that final moment in the hospital was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. Mark's dying whisper, Sarah's soft, possessive reply. I played it over and over in my mind, searching for another interpretation, a different meaning, anything to avoid the ugly truth that seemed so obvious. Maybe he was delirious? Maybe he thought he was talking to our mother, also named Sarah, who had passed years ago. But his eyes had been on his sister, and her reply, there was no mistaking the intimacy in her tone. It was the sound of a shared secret, a final acknowledgement of something hidden. At the funeral, I stood by the graveside, a black-clad doll going through the motions. People hugged me, murmuring empty platitudes. "He was such a good man. He loved you so much." Each word was a fresh torment. Did he? Did he really love me? Sarah stood beside me, a pillar of strength, her arm linked through mine. Her touch felt proprietary, as if she were staking a claim not just on Mark's memory, but on me as well. During the eulogy, delivered by Mark's best friend, I found myself watching her instead of listening. Her face was a mask of perfect grief, a single, elegant tear tracing a path down, her cheek at just the right moment. It was a performance, I realized with a jolt of clarity. Every glance, every sigh, every comforting squeeze of my arm felt rehearsed. The thought was so monstrous, so disloyal to the woman who was supposedly holding me together, that I tried to push it away, but it lodged in my mind like a shard of glass. Later, at the reception held at our house, my house, she moved through the rooms with an unnerving familiarity, refilling drinks, directing people to the bathroom, accepting condolences as if she were the hostess, the true lady of the house. More than once, I heard someone say, "Thank God you have Sarah, Laura. What would you do without her?" And I would smile weakly, a silent scream building in my throat. What would I do without her? I was beginning to think I might be safer. The first concrete crack in the facade appeared a week after the funeral. The house was finally quiet. The last of the sympathy cards had been read, and the scent of lilies was beginning to fade. I was sitting at Mark's desk in his home office, trying to summon the strength to start sorting through his things. It felt like a violation, an intrusion into a life that was no longer his. Sarah let herself in with the key she'd had for years. She didn't knock. She found me staring at a stack of mail, my hands trembling. "Oh, you shouldn't be doing this alone," she said, her voice chiding but gentle. "This is too much for you right now." She came over and started sorting through the envelopes with brisk efficiency. Bills, junk, condolence. Ah, this looks important. She held up a thick manila envelope from Mark's life insurance company. We should open this together. I felt a flicker of resentment. We. But I was too tired to argue. She slid it open with a letter opener from Mark's desk. As she read the document, her expression shifted. For a split second, the mask of gentle concern slipped, and I saw a flash of raw, naked greed. It was so quick I almost missed it, but it was there. A tightening around her mouth, a hungry glint in her eyes. "Oh, Laura," she said, her voice now thick with emotion. "Mark took such good care of you, of us." She turned the paper toward me. The policy was for $2 million, and the beneficiary had been recently updated. It was no longer just me, it was split 50-50. Half for me, his wife, and half for his beloved sister, Sarah. I stared at the paper, my blood turning to ice. I didn't remember this. Mark had never mentioned changing the policy. He handled all the finances, but something this big, he would have told me. "He must have done it when he first got sick," Sarah said, already providing the narrative. "He always wanted to make sure I was looked after. He was so worried about me." Her voice was smooth, plausible. But I remembered the look on her face. It wasn't the look of someone surprised by a loved one's generosity. It was the look of someone confirming a prize they already knew they had won. The seed of suspicion, planted in that sterile hospital room, began to sprout, its roots digging deep into the foundation of my reality. I started to question everything. Mark's illness had been a mystery from the start. It began with fatigue, then nausea, then a slow, creeping weakness that baffled every specialist we saw. They ran countless tests, scanned every organ, and found nothing definitive. A typical autoimmune response, one doctor had suggested, his words vague and unsatisfying. Sometimes the body just turns on itself. Mark had withered away before my eyes, and no one could tell me why. Now a new, terrifying question began to form in my mind. Had his body turned on itself, or had someone helped it along? I thought back over the last few months of his life. Sarah had been a constant presence, always arriving with a flask of her special herbal tea. She'd brew it herself, a concoction of roots and leaves she claimed helped with everything from inflammation to anxiety. "It's an old family recipe," she'd say with a smile. "It always made Mark feel better when we were kids." Mark had drunk it dutifully, desperate for any relief. I'd even had a cup myself once or twice. It had a bitter, earthy taste. I had trusted her. I had trusted them both. I went into the kitchen and opened the cabinet where she kept her tea supplies. The tin was still there. I opened it, the scent of dried herbs filling the air. It looked innocent enough, but as I stared at the mix of dried leaves and petals, a chill snaked its way up my spine. What if the betrayal wasn't just emotional? What if it was something far more sinister? The thought was so grotesque, so unthinkable, that my mind recoiled from it. People didn't do things like that. Not in my quiet, suburban life. Not my sister-in-law. But then I pictured her face in the hospital room, that flicker of triumph. I pictured her eyes as she read the insurance policy, and I knew with a certainty that terrified me that I had to find out the truth. My grief was no longer a passive, crushing weight. It was transforming into something else, something sharp and cold and focused. It was becoming a weapon. My quiet investigation started in the one place that was truly his, a sanctuary I had rarely entered, his home office. It was a room that smelled of old books, leather, and the faint citrusy scent of the aftershave he'd worn for years. The grief hit me in a fresh wave as I sat in his chair, my fingers tracing the worn spot on the armrest where his hand used to be. For a moment, I almost abandoned my morbid quest, wanting only to curl up and mourn the man I loved, the marriage I thought I had. But the image of Sarah's face, her soft whisper of "I love you too," propelled me forward. I had to know if my life had been a lie. I started with the obvious, the file cabinets. It was a tedious process, sifting through a decade and a half of shared life reduced to paper. Mortgages, tax returns, car titles. Everything seemed to be in order, meticulously organized, in his familiar, precise handwriting. Then I found the folder labeled Insurance. Inside, tucked behind the auto and home policies, was the life insurance packet. I pulled out the most recent statement, the one Sarah had so eagerly opened. The beneficiary change was dated 3 months ago, right when Mark's symptoms had taken a serious turn for the worse. My signature was on the form, a shaky, unfamiliar version of my own name. I stared at it, my heart pounding. I had no memory of signing this. Had he asked me to sign a stack of papers and I'd just done it, trusting him implicitly? Or was it a forgery? It was good, but looking closely, I could see the hesitation in the loops, the slight tremor that wasn't mine. My hands were shaking as I turned on his laptop. It felt like the ultimate betrayal, prying into his private world. But I was past the point of caring about propriety. I needed answers. His password was, as it always had been, our anniversary. The irony was a bitter pill. I started with his emails, scanning subject lines, looking for anything with Sarah's name, or the insurance company, or anything that seemed out of place. I found chains of emails between him and Sarah, mostly mundane things, family dinners, links to articles. But the tone in the more recent ones was different. Her messages were filled with an almost cloying concern for his health, while his replies were short, sometimes just 1 or 2 words. He sounded tired, weary. Deeper in his inbox, I found what I was looking for. An email from his financial advisor, dated a week after the insurance policy was changed. "Mark," it read, confirming our conversation. "As per your request, I've initiated the process to revert the beneficiary designation on your life insurance policy back to Laura as the sole beneficiary. The paperwork should arrive for your signature within 5-7 business days." My breath caught in my throat. He had tried to change it back. He had realized his mistake, or perhaps he had started to suspect something himself. I frantically searched for a follow-up email, for the paperwork, for anything to indicate he had completed the process. There was nothing. The paperwork had never been signed. Had it even arrived? Or had Sarah, who was at the house so often, intercepted it? A cold dread was spreading through me, a certainty that I was standing on the edge of a chasm. I closed the email program and started looking through his browser history. It was a digital ghost of the man he was. News sites, woodworking forums, travel blogs for a trip to Italy we were planning for our anniversary. And then I saw it. Page after page of searches, all from the late hours of the night when he couldn't sleep. Symptoms of chronic fatigue, causes of unexplained weight loss, nerve damage from unknown toxins, and then the searches that made my blood run cold. Tasteless, odorless poisons, effects of arsenic poisoning, ethylene glycol toxicity symptoms. He had known, or at least he had suspected. He wasn't just sick, he thought he was being poisoned. And he hadn't told me. Why? Was he trying to protect me? Or was he so deep in a web of deceit, so entangled with his sister, that he couldn't see a way out? I felt a wave of nausea. This was so much worse than an affair. An affair was a betrayal of love. This was a betrayal of life itself. I minimized the browser and started clicking through the files on his desktop, my movements frantic now. I found a locked folder named Personal. I tried a few passwords, my birthday, his birthday, our dog's name. Nothing worked. On a whim, I typed in the one word that now haunted my every waking thought: Sarah. The folder opened. Inside was a single document, a text file created just 2 weeks before he died. I clicked it open, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a letter addressed to me. My dearest Laura, it began. If you are reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to tell you myself, and my worst fears have come true. I am so sorry. I have made a terrible mistake, and I think it is costing me my life. It's Sarah. I don't know how it started, but she has me trapped. The debts, she said, they were from a bad investment, that she would lose everything. She needed collateral for a loan, and she convinced me to temporarily add her to my life insurance policy. She swore it would only be for a few months. I was a fool to believe her. But Laura, it's more than that. I think she is hurting me. The tea she brings, I feel worse after I drink it. I've been so weak, so confused. I tried to change the policy back, but I think she knows. She watches me all the time. I'm scared. I don't know who to trust. I love you, Laura. Never doubt that. I have loved you every second of every day. Forgive me for my weakness. Don't let her get away with this. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. The grief was immense, but it was a different kind of grief now. It wasn't for a man who had betrayed me, but for a man who had been trapped, manipulated, and murdered. And he had been trying to warn me. His last words weren't a confession. They were an accusation. Sarah. He was trying to name his killer, and my next thought was utterly chilling. If she was willing to kill her own brother for money, what would she do to me, the only other person standing in her way? The house suddenly felt cold and vast, no longer a home but a potential crime scene. I wasn't just a grieving widow, I was a witness, and I was in terrible danger. The knowledge settled into my bones like a permanent winter. I was living in the same house, breathing the same air as a woman who had murdered my husband and was now entitled to $1 million of his money. My money. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I felt hunted. My first instinct was to run, to pack a bag and disappear, to call the police and tell them everything. But what did I really have? A letter on a password-protected file that she could claim I wrote myself? A suspicious browser history? It was all circumstantial, flimsy. It was my word against hers, and she had spent months carefully crafting the image of the devoted sister and the compassionate sister-in-law. Everyone saw her as my savior. If I suddenly accused her of murder, they would think grief had made me lose my mind. They would pity me, try to get me help, and she would be there, tut-tutting with concern, tightening her grip. No, I couldn't run, and I couldn't fight her head-on. I had to be smarter than that. I had to be colder. A plan began to form, not in a flash of inspiration, but slowly, piece by piece, forged in the fires of my fear and rage. If she was a performer, then I would become one too. I would play the part she had cast for me. The fragile, grieving widow, incapable of handling her own affairs, utterly dependent on her kind, strong sister-in-law. I would lean on her, praise her, thank her, until she felt completely secure, completely in control. I would make her believe she had gotten away with it. Her arrogance would be her downfall. I would let her walk into a trap of her own making. The first step was to control my environment. I went online and ordered 2 of the smallest, highest resolution spy cameras I could find, the kind disguised as USB chargers. I also bought a tiny digital voice recorder, small enough to slip into my pocket. I paid with a credit card Sarah didn't know about and had them delivered to a friend's house. When they arrived, I waited until I was sure Sarah was out for the day, and then I set them up. I placed one camera in the living room, plugged into an outlet with a clear view of the sofa and the armchair where we usually sat. The second one I put in the kitchen, aimed at the counter where she always prepared her infamous tea. It felt clandestine and terrifying, like I was a character in a spy movie, but the fear was overshadowed by a cold, clear sense of purpose. This was not just for Mark anymore. This was for my own survival. The next time Sarah came over, I put on the performance of my life. I answered the door with my eyes red-rimmed and my hair uncombed. I let my shoulders slump, my voice tremble. "Sarah, thank God you're here," I whispered, letting her guide me to the sofa. "I don't know what I'd do without you." It worked. She positively glowed with self-importance. "Of course, Laura," she said, patting my hand. "I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." I spent the next hour asking her for help with everything. Could she call the bank for me? I just couldn't bear to talk to them. Could she look at this form from the lawyer? It was all just legal jargon to me. I made myself small, helpless, and incompetent. And she expanded to fill the space, becoming more confident, more authoritative with every task I handed her. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it," she said, a phrase she had never used before. It was condescending, dismissive, and utterly perfect. She was starting to see me, not as an equal, but as a child, a problem to be managed. That evening, after she left, I retrieved the memory card from the living room camera. My hands shook as I inserted it into my laptop. I watched the footage, fast-forwarding through the mundane parts. There she was, patting my hand, her face a mask of sympathy. But when I turned away to get a tissue, her expression changed. For a brief second, the mask slipped. A look of profound irritation and impatience crossed her face, before being replaced by the gentle smile as I turned back. It was chilling. She was acting, and she was good at it. But I was better, because I had the truth on my side, and I had a camera. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. A silent, deadly chess match played out over cups of coffee and piles of paperwork. I was the grieving widow, and Sarah was the dutiful caretaker. On the surface, we were 2 women bound by a shared loss. Beneath, a lethal current of deception flowed between us. My act of helplessness was paying dividends. Sarah's overconfidence grew exponentially. She started making decisions without consulting me, signing documents on my behalf, using a power of attorney form she'd had me sign in the first week, telling me it was just for small things, to make it easier on you. She began talking about the future, her future, with a disturbing sense of entitlement. Once the insurance money comes through, I'm thinking of buying a small condo on the coast, she said one afternoon, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mark would have wanted me to be happy, you know. He always worried about me. She spoke of my husband's wishes as if she had a direct line to him, twisting his memory into a justification for her own greed. I would just nod, my face a carefully constructed canvas of sorrowful agreement, while inside a cold fire of rage burned. Every night became a ritual. I would wait until the house was silent, then retrieve the memory cards and the voice recorder. I'd huddle over my laptop in the dark, my heart pounding as I reviewed the day's harvest. It was a slow, painstaking process. Most of it was useless. Hours of me staring into space, or Sarah talking on the phone to friends, receiving their praise for being such a wonderful sister-in-law. But there were nuggets, small but damning pieces of her true nature. I recorded her on the phone with the insurance company, her voice sharp and impatient as she demanded to know the status of the payout. Yes, I understand there's a processing period, she'd snapped, but given the circumstances, I was hoping it could be expedited. There was no grief in her voice, only avarice. Another time, a friend of ours called to check in on me, and Sarah answered the phone in the kitchen, right under the camera. "She's fragile," I heard Sarah say, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Honestly, I worry she's not coping. She's been saying some strange things, getting confused. I think the trauma might have been too much for her." My blood ran cold. She wasn't just controlling the finances, she was controlling the narrative about my mental state. She was preemptively discrediting me. If I ever did go to the police, she had already laid the groundwork to have me dismissed as an unstable, hysterical widow. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. She was not just a greedy opportunist, she was a meticulous planner. A predator who had been grooming her victim and the surrounding herd for months. I saved every clip, every audio file, creating a secret folder on my laptop, a digital archive of her evil. It was my insurance policy. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. The strain of living a lie, of smiling at the woman who had destroyed my life, was eating away at me. I was barely sleeping, and when I did, my dreams were filled with images of Mark, his face pale and pleading. I needed something more, something undeniable. I needed her to confess, and I knew with a sickening certainty that to get it, I would have to make myself the bait. I decided to use her own weapon against her, the tea. For weeks, she had continued to bring over her special herbal blend, insisting it would help calm my nerves. "You look so pale, Laura," she would say, her eyes full of false sympathy. "Let me make you a cup." It always helped Mark. The casual cruelty of that statement never failed to stun me. I had been politely declining, saying I wasn't in the mood, but I knew that to spring the trap, I had to change my tactics. The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. I would pretend to be sick, with symptoms that mimicked the beginning of Mark's illness. Then I would accept her offer of tea. I would let her believe she was going to solve her final problem, me, in the same way she had solved her first. The day I chose was a dreary Tuesday, the sky the color of slate. I called her in the morning, my voice deliberately weak and raspy. "Sarah, I'm not feeling well," I croaked. "I feel so dizzy and nauseous." The concern in her voice was immediate, and to anyone else, completely convincing. "Oh, you poor thing. Don't you move. I'll be right over. I'll bring some of my tea. It will settle your stomach." The casual way she said it, the immediate jump to her chosen method, confirmed everything. This was it. Before she arrived, I made my preparations. I set up my phone on a small tripod on the bookshelf, hidden behind a stack of books, its camera recording, and aimed directly at the armchair I would be sitting in. I took the spy camera from the living room outlet and plugged it into one behind the sofa, giving me a second angle. In the kitchen, I placed a clean mug on the counter next to the kettle. Then I took a second identical mug and filled it with regular chamomile tea I had brewed earlier. I hid it in the back of the microwave. The swap would have to be seamless. When Sarah arrived, she bustled in, all efficiency and concern. "You look dreadful," she said, a little too cheerfully. She felt my forehead, her hand cool against my skin. "No fever, that's good. I'll get that tea started." I watched her from the living room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The kitchen camera was rolling. I saw her fill the kettle, then take out her special tin of herbs. She measured the leaves into an infuser, her movements precise. Then, just as she was about to pour the water, she glanced over her shoulder to see if I was watching. I quickly looked away, pretending to be lost in a fog of illness. In that moment, I saw her on the laptop screen, which I had angled to reflect the kitchen doorway. I saw her reach into her purse and pull out a small, unlabeled vial of clear liquid. With another quick glance in my direction, she uncapped it and tipped its contents into the mug. My breath hitched. It was happening. She was actually doing it, right there in my kitchen, in broad daylight. She poured the boiling water into the mug, the steam rising to momentarily obscure the camera's view. Then she brought the mug into the living room, a beatific smile on her face. "Here you are," she said, her voice like honey. "Drink this all up. It will make you feel so much better." She placed the mug on the table beside me. The smell was earthy, familiar, but now it smelled like death. I looked at her, my hand trembling as I reached for the cup. "Thank you, Sarah," I whispered. "You're always taking such good care of me." Her smile widened. "Always," she said. "That's what family is for." The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. I held the warm mug in my hands, the heat seeping into my cold fingers. The cameras were rolling, my phone was recording, everything was in place. Sarah settled onto the sofa opposite me, watching me with an unnerving intensity, her friendly mask firmly in place. "Go on," she prompted gently. "It's best when it's hot." I knew I couldn't actually drink it. The swap had to happen now. I took a deep, shaky breath. "You know," I said, my voice wavering, "I think I need a little honey in this. It's a bit bitter today." I started to stand up, feigning weakness. "Oh, sit down, you silly thing," she said, jumping to her feet. "You stay put. I'll get it for you." It was exactly what I had hoped she would do. The moment she turned her back and walked into the kitchen, I moved. My actions were a blur of adrenaline-fueled precision. I placed the poisoned mug on the floor behind the armchair, out of sight. I lunged for the microwave, pulled out the identical mug of safe, pre-made tea, and placed it on the table in front of me, just as she was walking back into the room. It took less than 5 seconds. My heart was jackhammering. I was sure she must have heard it, must have seen the frantic movement. But she was oblivious, a small pot of honey and a spoon in her hand. "Here we are," she said, her voice bright. She spooned a dollop of honey into the safe tea, my tea, and stirred it for me. There, that should be better. She sat back down, her eyes fixed on me, waiting. I lifted the cup to my lips, my hands shaking so badly, I was afraid I would spill it. I took a sip. It was warm, sweet chamomile. That's much better, I said, forcing a weak smile. Thank you. I took another, larger sip, making a show of drinking it down. Relief washed over Sarah's face, a subtle relaxation of the muscles around her eyes. She thought I had taken the bait. She settled back into the cushions, prepared to wait. An hour passed. We made small talk. She told me about her plans for the condo, the real estate listings she'd been looking at. She was giddy, her words tumbling out in an excited rush. She was already spending the money, my money. All the while, I was acting my part, letting my eyelids droop, my speech become slower, more slurred. I feel so sleepy, I murmured, letting my head loll to the side. That's the tea, dear, she said soothingly. It's a relaxant. Just let yourself rest. I leaned back in the armchair and closed my eyes, my breathing becoming slow and deep. I was feigning sleep, but every nerve in my body was on high alert. I listened to her movements, the rustle of a magazine, the soft click of her phone as she scrolled. The waiting was the hardest part, a torturous limbo where I was both the hunter and the hunted. How long would she wait? What was her next move? After another 20 minutes of silence, I heard her get up. Her footsteps were soft on the rug as she approached my chair. I could feel her presence looming over me, could smell the faint scent of her perfume. I forced my body to remain limp, my breathing even. I felt her fingers on my wrist, checking for a pulse. They were cold. A long moment passed, then she spoke, her voice a low, chilling whisper directly into my ear. "It's for the best, Laura," she murmured, the words dripping with a cold, matter-of-fact poison that was far more potent than whatever was in the vial. "You were never strong enough for him. Now you can be with him. I'll take care of everything from here." It was the confession, the final undeniable proof, the words I had been waiting and praying for, the trigger for the end of the nightmare. My eyes snapped open. I stared directly into her face, which was just inches from mine. Her expression was a horrifying mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning terror. The mask of the caring sister-in-law evaporated, revealing the monster beneath. "I heard that," I said, my voice no longer weak, but clear and cold as ice. I pushed myself up in the chair, my body thrumming with a ferocious, righteous energy. Her jaw dropped. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with a disbelief. You're supposed to be," she stammered, unable to finish the sentence. "Supposed to be what, Sarah?" I asked, my voice rising. "Asleep? Dying like Mark?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small digital recorder, holding it up for her to see. The small red light was still blinking. "It's all here, every word." At the same time, I reached for the television remote on the side table and pressed the power button. But I didn't turn on the TV. It was a prearranged signal. My friend and neighbor, David, a retired police officer, had been waiting in his house across the street, watching my front window. I had told him everything the day before, shown him Mark's letter, and begged him for his help. He had been skeptical at first, but the raw terror in my eyes had convinced him. The remote was his cue. He was calling 911 right now, telling them there was a possible homicide in progress at my address. Sarah stared at the recorder, then at me, her mind scrambling to process the new reality. The hunter had become the prey. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "What have you done?" "I've done what Mark couldn't," I shot back, standing up to face her. "I've exposed you." I pointed to the bookshelf. "And you're on camera, Sarah. You have been for weeks. I have you on the phone with the insurance company. I have you telling people I'm losing my mind. And just now, I have you confessing to my murder, right after you watched me drink the poison you put in my tea." I gestured to the mug on the floor behind the chair. "The real mug, the one you served me. I imagine the police will be very interested in testing its contents." Her face went white. She looked from me to the hidden cameras she was only now noticing, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. The confident, calculating woman was gone, replaced by a cornered, desperate creature. "You bitch," she snarled, her face contorting into a mask of pure hatred. "You think you're so clever?" She lunged at me, her hands outstretched like claws, aiming for the recorder. I sidestepped her, and she stumbled, crashing into the coffee table. The carefully arranged magazines and coasters went flying. She was unraveling, her composure shattering into a million pieces. "Mark wanted this," she screamed, her voice raw and unhinged. "He wanted me to be happy. You were always holding him back, with your pathetic little life and your endless needs." The torrent of verbal abuse was shocking, a geyser of resentment that had clearly been simmering for years. It was the final confirmation, not that I needed it, that this was never about love. It was about jealousy, greed, and a festering hatred she had hidden behind a lifetime of smiles. Just then, we both heard it, the distant, unmistakable wail of sirens, growing closer with every second. Sarah froze, her head snapping toward the front door. The sound of her doom was racing toward her. For a moment, she just stood there, panting, her chest heaving, and then she let out a sound that I will never forget, a guttural scream of pure, unadulterated rage and despair. The game was over. She had lost. The arrival of the police was a blur of organized chaos. 2 uniformed officers came through the door first, their hands on their holsters, their eyes scanning the scene. David, my neighbor, was right behind them. He gave me a quick, concerned look, and I nodded to let him know I was okay. Sarah didn't resist. All the fight seemed to drain out of her the moment she saw the uniforms. She just stood there, trembling as they read her rights, and cuffed her hands behind her back. She looked small and pathetic, the powerful, manipulative woman completely gone, leaving only a hollow shell. As they led her out of the house, her eyes met mine one last time. There was no remorse in them, no apology, only a look of pure, bottomless hatred. It was a look that promised she would haunt me forever. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I had faced the monster, and I had won. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of statements, evidence collection, and flashing lights. The forensics team, in their sterile white suits, carefully bagged the poisoned mug of tea. They took the cameras, the voice recorder, my laptop with Mark's letter. I told my story over and over, first to the responding officers, then to a calm, patient detective named Miller. I walked her through everything, from Mark's last words to Sarah's whispered confession. I felt strangely detached, as if I were narrating a movie I had seen. The shock was setting in, and my body was finally starting to process the trauma of the last few months. When they were finally done, and the last police car had pulled away, David helped me clean up, the overturned coffee table. "You were incredibly brave, Laura," he said, his voice full of a respect that I didn't feel I deserved. "You did what you had to do." I just nodded, too exhausted to speak. The case was a slam dunk. The evidence was overwhelming. The lab results came back, confirming the presence of a concentrated, tasteless substance derived from a common ornamental plant in the tea Sarah had served me, a substance known to cause cardiac arrest in high doses. The same trace elements were found in a blood sample taken from Mark during his final hospital stay, which had been preserved for further testing. Sarah's story kept changing. First, she denied everything. Then, she claimed I was trying to frame her. Then, she tried to say Mark had been suicidal and she was just helping him. But the recordings were undeniable. Her voice, her words, her intent. It was all there in crystal clear audio and video. The financial motive was clear. The forged signature on the insurance form was confirmed by a handwriting expert. And Mark's letter served as a voice from the grave, corroborating the entire timeline. The trial was a media sensation in our small town. The story of the Black Widow's sister splashed across the local news. I had to testify. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. Getting up on the stand, looking at her sitting there at the defendant's table, and recounting the most horrific moments of my life was an ordeal that scraped me raw. But I did it, for Mark, and for myself. I told the jury about his illness, about her tea, about his last words, and about her final whispered confession. I watched her face as the audio from the recorder was played in the silent courtroom. Her chilling words, "It's for the best, Laura, you can be with him now," echoed in the vast room, and a collective gasp went through the gallery. In that moment, everyone saw her for what she was. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. Guilty, on all counts, murder and attempted murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's been a year since the trial. The house is quiet now. I sold it, unable to stay in a place with so many ghosts. I live in a small apartment downtown, closer to the life of the city. I'm slowly rebuilding. There are good days and bad days. Sometimes a smell or a sound will transport me back to that hospital room, and the grief and betrayal will feel as fresh as it did in that first moment. But the sharp edges of the pain are starting to soften. I've started to remember Mark as he was before the illness, before Sarah's poison started seeping not just into his body, but into our lives. I remember his easy laugh, the way he would hum off-key while he cooked, the feeling of his hand in mine. I've come to understand his final words. He wasn't confessing his love for Sarah. He was trying to finish a thought, a warning. "Sarah," he had whispered, trying to name her. And when he said, "I love," he was looking past her, his dying eyes searching for me, trying to say, "I love you, Laura." He was trying to give me one last gift, one final piece of himself, and his body failed him. But I got the message anyway. His love wasn't the betrayal, it was the clue that saved my life. I will never understand the depth of darkness that lived inside Sarah, the toxic mix of greed and jealousy that allowed her to murder her own brother and try to murder me. But I no longer waste my energy trying. My focus now is on living. Not just surviving, but truly living. I am reclaiming the life she tried to steal from me. I have learned that evil often wears a familiar face, that the most dangerous monsters are the ones we invite into our homes. But I have also learned that there is a strength within us, that we never know we possess until we are tested. I was just an ordinary woman, a wife who loved her husband. But when the unthinkable happened, I found a reserve of courage I never knew I had. I fought back. And I survived. My husband's last words were for another woman, and she did answer back. But I got the last word, and my word was justice.